Welcome to Ambition's Apex, your guide to mastering the art of physique transformation and achieving peak performance across all arenas of life. Our mission is not just to sculpt bodies, but to change lives, empowering you towards excellence. Dive in with us as we explore insights and strategies designed to elevate you towards your journey of self-improvement. Enjoy the ascent. Darin, I'm glad we got you on, man. How are we doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. We've worked together in some capacity for quite some time now. I send a ton of my athletes to you. I've used your services for labs over quite a few years now. And, you know, we unfortunately kind of linked up pretty early on in business stages for you. So I kind of want to know a little bit more, like in terms of business ownership, how you kind of got started into this realm and, you know, what kind of drove you to the place that you're at now in terms of getting into lab analysis and HRT and all these other realms that you're dealing with right now.
Yeah, so kind of funny. So I was in college and I was studying business at the time. Got a couple different concentrations doing that while I was in school. And I was ironically spend the majority of my time in class just learning about pharmacology. That's just like what I found interesting. So like if I wasn't paying attention, that was what I was researching. And it kind of led me down the whole bodybuilding rabbit hole a little bit. I was one of those idiots that messed with SARMs a little bit, like a lot of people who first get into it and then realize there's a better way to do things. And that was initially how I got into it. And I realized that there was a need for private pay, affordable lab work, and nobody was really offering it. So I had the idea, I don't know, probably 7 years ago. And I kind of sat on that idea for 4 years or so. And then was in a job that I didn't like when I got out of school and absolutely hated it. I was like, you know what, I'm young, I'm going to try this idea, and luckily it paid off. It's worked out. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Awesome, man. Well, it's been awesome to see it kind of grow over the years too, because you started with just kind of doing blood work, correct? And now you're all the way into HRT and pretty much a full clinic, right?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Operating in, I believe, 12 states now for HRT. So
awesome, man. Well, you touched on the fact that you wanted to create a more affordable way for individuals to get blood work done, correct? So explain to me a little bit more of where you kind of analyze that market demands and like how you've kind of seen it grow over the years as well.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I narrowed in on a pretty niche market. I think there's a lot of markets that would want affordable lab work, but the primary thing is it's hard to get insurance to cover blood work that's, you know, just exploratory, you know, unless there's an actual reason to test specific markers. So that really leads to, you know, a lot of people not getting the blood markers tested that they really want to look at or that they need to have looked at just because insurance is going to cover things. So that was where I had the idea of, okay, let's figure out something that we can do that's cash-based, still try to keep it to a relatively affordable area for people, something that could be quick, easy access, you know, they can go online, figure out what lab panel they want, or, you know, we got a custom builder too, where, you know, people can build their own tests and just really try to curate towards exactly the client needs.
That's awesome, man. It's definitely something that was needed because I've kind of been in this industry for quite some time. I started personal training very, very long ago. So I've been working with, you know, individuals that are wanting to optimize their health and do everything they possibly can, dig into every detail they possibly can to find where they can fine tune things. And it's always been a challenge to get blood work done or get it pulled from general practitioners. You know, they'll be able to get certain panels, CBCs, CMPs, stuff like that. But when we're trying to dig into sex hormones, thyroid, stuff like that, it can start to become difficult in terms of insurance coverage. So, and then when you try to get it done through, you know, your clinic or your lab work place down the street, they're charging you an arm and a leg out of pocket. So it was definitely something that was needed. And it seems like you got into it very, very early on. Do you think that you were one of the individuals on the forefront of getting into being able to create a more affordable route for people to get this lab work done?
I wouldn't say I was necessarily one of the first. I mean, there are some bigger companies obviously that got in first, like Life Extension. You know, they got their hands in a number of different areas. They were doing it before me. Ulta Labs was doing it before me. There's another company, Personal Labs, they were doing it before me. But I would say specifically geared towards the bodybuilding community, I was probably one of the first that did lab work, curated panels.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where I kind of connected with you early on, as I saw a lot of other coaches starting to work with you too. And so what was kind of your gateway into the bodybuilding world, and how did you start to leverage that in terms of attracting and retaining clients?
Yeah, so when I was in college, I went to a bodybuilding gym and I got to be around a lot of different bodybuilders. And they were all running different compounds and whatnot. Obviously, they mentioned how they were having trouble getting their blood work done. My mom actually owns a functional medicine practice, so I would have her order lab work for them at the time, and I kind of saw a need there, to be able to get formal blood work. I just had the idea at the time. I was like, you know what, this could probably be pretty beneficial. I mean, bodybuilding had kind of become really popular, I would say, over the last like 15 to 20 years. It's really grown a lot, especially in the past 10, with social media and whatnot. So at that time, once things started to really grow, I was like, there's probably a need for this. And I figured it'd be a good time once I got out of school to try it.
100%. That's awesome. So once you kind of got into it and you started getting up and running, what were some things that you did to make sure that things were running really efficiently, in terms of just best practices with the efficiency? And then because you're essentially cutting out the middleman to some extent, or you're kind of entering yourself as a middleman to create something more affordable. So what are some ways that you kind of systematize that to make sure that things ran efficiently?
Yeah, so I wanted to obviously have a website so that people could find, exactly what labs they wanted to get, and have it all listed out so they could see exactly what they're going to test. There's a lot of automation you can do in terms of emails, things being sent out, making sure that data, patient data is being stored in a way that's HIPAA compliant. So there are some things you have to be aware of in terms of that manner. And then tracking data was huge too. Having a way you can track data and really try to automate that can really save you a lot of time and make that process more smooth, more efficient, just quicker.
100%. You mentioned HIPAA compliance. Were there any challenges in terms of getting licensing and being compliant in that sense? And was there anything that kind of any hurdles that you had to overcome to get into the space?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you really just have to read into your contact state medical boards because every state kind of has different licensing requirements. They have different time periods when you have to renew your license. Some are every year, some every 3 years, some are every 5 years. So just being aware of when your renewal dates are for licenses. That was one thing I really had to be aware of. And then also, for prescribing medications, DEA licenses are required on top of a state medical license. Some require a controlled substance. It's called a CSR. You have to have on top of that as well. So just being aware of that, and kind of varies by state to state. And then with COVID, that obviously threw a wrench in all that too, because at that time you only had to have one DEA license, just because they were trying to make it so people had access to their medications, and everyone was in lockdown and whatnot, especially rural areas where people can't get their medicines very easily. Telemedicine really started to grow and boom during that time.
100%. Yeah, when that whole thing happened, I definitely knew that there was going to be a shift with businesses in terms of things being more remote, people working from home more, all those kinds of things. As soon as it happened, that was the first, my entrepreneur mind just was like, this is where this is heading, So
yeah, everything grew a ton during that time. It was either things completely tanked or grew, and if you were able to adapt to it, you were able to grow a lot.
100%. And that was right around the time where I was getting pretty much going full bore into online coaching specifically, and doing a lot less in person. And it was interesting to watch how a lot of us individuals were it was just right place, right time kind of thing. We were already getting into a space where it was going to be a remote thing, and it just worked out well. So, sometimes you can leverage things like that. So,
I was kind of coming out of COVID a little bit. I started my business in November 2021. So it was right when we were starting to come out of COVID, but online coaching was really starting to grow a ton. So I was right in there at that right time too. So timing definitely played a role in that as well.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that we got to link up right around the same time.
Yeah,
it was kind of synergistically happening. Pun intended there.
Yeah, pun intended.
So we're touching on kind of remote stuff. What are some other ways? And you talked about kind of how you systematize things and automate some things. What are some other technology and innovative kind of things that you guys are doing, or maybe some things on the horizon as well in regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, using Salesforce is huge. Definitely we're trying to switch over to something like that so we can really try to track data a little bit more efficiently. A lot of businesses are going towards that. It's just a way better tool just for CRM management. Especially you can use it in healthcare setting. They have healthcare licenses you can use for that. So that's definitely a good tool to use. But the medical field's weird. So you obviously have to worry about being HIPAA compliant with most of your, all your data. And a lot of the software that's currently available isn't super streamlined. And if it is really streamlined, it's extremely expensive. So the most widely used, EMR, which is your electronic medical record, is Epic. That's used by most major hospital systems, but it's thousands upon thousands of dollars a month just to have that. So it become a barrier to running a business when you're trying to grow if you don't have a lot of patients or clients yet.
Very interesting. We kind of touched on how we collided early on when we were both kind of getting onto the online business and stuff. And with you being more in the bodybuilding realm and marketing more towards bodybuilding athletes, what are some additional ways? Because you got started with like a lot of the affiliations, right? With a lot of coaches. I see a lot of coaches I respect greatly that are associated with you guys. So that was what kind of drew you to leverage that in the first place, and what are some other things you're doing to stay within the bodybuilding realm?
Yeah, so what drew me to that initially was honestly pretty much guaranteed marketing. So with Google Ads, it's kind of hit or miss depending on how much you want to spend. Your spend can get really high really quick, and you don't know if it's going to really work that well until you've been doing it for a couple months too. And let's say you spent a couple $1,000s on ads for a few months and you haven't gotten a whole lot. That's essentially money thrown away. It's kind of how I looked at it, and we do that now. Obviously, we'll run ads and whatnot, but with getting affiliates on board, you pretty much just have to look out for coaches that have a good amount of clients. So like things I'll look for when we're trying to sign on different coaches to be affiliates is, are they actually posting things to their clients, or are their pictures, mostly themselves? You can kind of differentiate who's actually a legitimate coach and who isn't. You have a lot of people that claim to be online health coaches that are never posting anything about the clients or anything of that nature. So trying to decipher who would be a good fit. And then talking to them, obviously, to kind of gauge how many people they work with, but just providing incentive towards those coaches too to want to have their clients get blood work through you. So making sure they can get all their blood work tested for their athletes, getting every blood marker they want in a smooth, efficient way. So it benefits them because their clients are well taken care of, and it kind of guarantees business because you're essentially inheriting that client roster. So
100%, and affiliate marketing and leveraging like influencers is obviously a huge marketing tactic that's pretty prevalent at this point. And since you were inserting yourself into a very niche area, you kind of leverage that the other individuals within that niche and the ones that have the power kind of. And I tell that to, or I say this sometimes too with like supplement brands and stuff like that. Sometimes the best people to have on board are coaches and less about like influencers, right? Because it's not about like the coaches following, it's like on social media or on paper. It's about the following that's actually underneath them, where they're actually putting the supplements on the programs, and and that's where a lot of the sales end up coming from with these.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you there. I mean, I've worked with some people that are, they get massive followings, but they're not generating as much as somebody, maybe have 4,000, 5,000 followers on Instagram. This person had 150 or something like that. So I've seen both ends of that spectrum. It's interesting to look at that data. It's unless you're in a business where you're in affiliate marketing and really look at those things, you're not really paying attention to it. You're just like, oh, they have a lot of followers, but how many of those followers are also bot followers too? You don't know.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned some other brands and how there's I would say it's still relatively niche, and it's not super saturated by any means, especially within the bodybuilding realm. But what are some things you've done to differentiate yourself in the Synergistic brand from other lab work kind of centric brands and HRT brands?
That's a tough one. I mean, at our core, I would say we're predominantly lab work. We're predominantly lab work oriented. I think there's a lot of clinics, and I don't want to bash any clinics at all or name anyone's, but I think a lot of clinics are just big on pushing meds. And I don't think that's the route. I think if you're going to spend more money on something, you'd spend more money on blood work, because you can really get to the root issue of things, and you can avoid having to take additional medications if you don't need to. Trying to get to the root cause and fixing things, which you can identify a lot of those things through blood work, intake forms that we have, and then just talking to patients, really try to figure out what the root issue is. And, you, at the end of the day, you want to avoid taking a ton of medications if you can.
100%. And that's definitely why I kind of aligned with you early on. I could sense that that's what the idea was. And I could sense that you had that integrity as a business owner as well. And I've seen that throughout the time that we've worked together, and with me sending you my athletes as well. And we're definitely aligned in that in terms of finding the root cause of things and getting to the bottom of things, and not just slapping Band-Aids on everything. Or over prescribing things can be very dangerous for people and leave them with side effects that they're going to be with for the rest of their lives. And that can be, it's a serious deal, and so we have to be very careful with these things. And I think that there's a level of irresponsibility sometimes Like you said, not to name anybody, but we definitely see it,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of clinics that just want to push peptides. There's certain peptides that can really be beneficial in a bodybuilding context too, I think. I think IGF-1 is one that's kind of slept on a little bit, but not a lot of people really look into. I think it's a really good option for a lot of people. But it's one of those things, we'll provide it to people if they want it, but it's not something we're going to heavily push. We're not going to try to push, 4 vial bundles on people for $1,000 worth of peptides just to throw it at them. If it's something they want, sure, we can provide it, but it's not something we heavily push. It's something that, we see as more, it's supplemental. It's not, medically necessary. If they want it, yeah, we'll provide it though.
Do you think there needs to be maybe a little bit more regulation in terms of that with HRT clinics or legality stuff?
It's tough. I could argue it both ways. I think there needs to be more integrity from a prescriber standpoint, but I think when you get money involved, it makes it hard because you really have to draw a line on you're a business, you need to be profitable, you need to make money, but also you need to be keeping patient care at the forefront. So I think hospitals kind of work in a better setting on that. It's the doctors aren't necessarily making money based off of each individual patient. They are to a degree, but it's not where you can push a ton of medications and they get like huge kickbacks from that. Like, so if there's a lot of doctors that own their own practices, of course they're going to push for meds because they make more money. So it's just a hard line to draw. You really just have to keep your integrity in check, make sure you're not overprescribing just to make a buck.
100%. That's just kind of a balance that we have to ride as business owners in general, when we're providing a service to people and not taking advantage of that stuff, So it's good that you have that integrity, and I see that in you. And that's why I've continued to send my athletes to you throughout the years. Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about kind of leveraging bodybuilding coaches and stuff. Have you seen a lot of your growth predominantly coming from that and working with the coaches in the industry? And do you see how much of your business and clients have been coming maybe externally from that, just discovering you through maybe referrals or online or whatever it may be?
I would say the majority of our growth was from the affiliates and coaches. I'd say we grew mostly from that. But at that point, we also had a lot of people that just heard about us at that point. So, if you can kind of gauge it based off who's using discount codes and who's not during checkout process, so we can see all the data, see how many people are using a code, how many people are not. And I would say it's about half and half now. So doing affiliate marketing, you rely on people that do have communities established has definitely helped us grow. And you can obviously use those clients, but the word does spread. And you get people that are not just coming from coaches at that point. Once you've been around long enough, because I think been around for a little over 3 years now. So yeah, at this point, we have other people that we will get business from aside from just bodybuilding, and we get some Gen Pop people that come to us now as well too. For the HRT, one of the areas we advertise predominantly is in Reddit. There's a lot of people that ask TRT questions in there, or just peptide questions, hormone replacement therapy, and we found that's a pretty good place to advertise because you can target specific subreddits where you want your ads to show. And then you're basically ensuring that your advertising is really targeted.
Yeah, that's smart because over the years the bodybuilding community obviously is very niche, and there's always been a lot of forums have always been like a staple in our industry. It's been like that for a very long time.
Yeah,
so, really since the internet kind of came about, there's been some level there's always been some level of forum discussing bodybuilding topics, right? So and now Reddit, with being on the forefront of kind of forums in general, it's definitely smart for you to be leveraging that. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
100%. So we talked on over prescribing and some of the other things that are not the best practices. What are some other things you're doing to kind of mitigate risks around everything that you're doing, and maybe identifying it within what's happening with the individuals underneath you, and how you kind of focus on quality control of all that?
Yeah, so I think we get a lot of people that will come to us for just enhancement too, that want to come to us just for enhancement. And that's where it comes back to, we got to look at the blood work and make sure it's appropriate to prescribe those things. There's no really clinically health appropriate way to prescribe, let's say, Winstrol, Anavar, all those drugs. We know they're going to be used. We don't judge people for using them. That's not where we come in. But, if someone has, an elevated hemoglobin hematocrit that's in a bad spot, let's say they got a 53 or 54 hematocrit, right? we're not going to give them Winstrol and Anavar. We want to see those blood markers get taken care of because, those things are just going to get upregulated even more once you throw more androgens at that. So we'll prescribe those types of medications if people want it, but we have to make sure those numbers are in check, whether that be through donating blood or, using something like an ARB to try to get those under control. Sometimes it's a combination of both. But, at the forefront, I'd say what we are is, replacement therapy and then getting health to a good spot. And if they want to use other compounds, they can. And then also, we get a lot of people that come to us, they've just got done with the show and they're like, hey, I use this, this, and this. Can you help me get my health back to a good spot? So we also work with like those types of situations as well.
100%. That's really good. In terms of HRT practices with men and women, what are some of the things that you explore within that, or are like what's the surge in terms of where a lot of those prescriptions are going, and what are some of the medications that are being used the most within HRT?
Yeah, for men, I would say TRT, obviously. So testosterone is like the main one that you see getting used. You get people ask for Winstrol and Anavar. We don't really prescribe those a ton. People ask for different peptides. I'm kind of in between on some of the peptides. I think some of the GH peptides can be good. Like I said, I'm a fan of IGF-1 LR3. I think it's a great compound that a lot of people are sleeping on at the moment. As far as like the female side, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, those are all good ones to look at. Even IGF-1 can be a good one for women as well if they're trying to get some muscle growth without really pushing that androgen load high. I think it's a really good option for them. Yeah, I would say those are like the main ones that we typically work with. It's kind of a chicken or the egg scenario in terms of when prescribing estrogen versus testosterone, though, you really have to evaluate it's weird. So you can get some aromatase from testosterone, taking testosterone, right? But the standard practice is you're supposed to prescribe progesterone and estrogen together first, because progesterone acts as that antagonist against estrogen, so they can help with just regulating a normal cycle, and then you can throw testosterone mix. Sometimes we'll go testosterone, progesterone first, but it's kind of a case by case basis.
Absolutely. You touched on peptides. What are some other ones that you see that are useful? I actually did a segment on this recently because I kind of do like a power hour talk with my athletes once a month. And I did a whole segment on peptides specifically, and some of the ones that are on the forefront, some of the ones that a lot of people are utilizing. So what are some of the other ones you see in use right now? Because it's definitely a hot topic. A lot of people are using them. And what are some other ones that may be on the horizon that you might see too? Because a lot of this is like a new kind of surgence of what's happening within our industry.
Yeah, so I think specifically within bodybuilding, I think I'm sure you know this, L-carnitine is a big one. I think for a lot of people, the injection frequency and the volumes kind of can be a lot for them. You can get some necrosis going on where you're painting in the same spot every day. So that's just one to be aware of. But I think that's a really good compound for just helping aid in fat loss. There's a number of ways you can use it. I mean, you can use it in a fasted state and then go do cardio. You can use it prior to meals. It's kind of based off the individual how they want to use it. I've seen it be successful in both ways. I think another one would be some of the GH peptides, like I mentioned. Sermorellin's a big one. CJC and ipamorelin were pretty big, but you can't really get those through pharmacies anymore because the FDA banned on certain peptides. Tesamorellin's another big one. Let's see what else. The GLP-1s. I think you're going to continue to see more development of those. There's a lot of bash on GLP-1s within the bodybuilding community. I think a lot of people view GLP-1s as a shortcut. And I understand that perspective too. I do think they have their role though. I mean, let's be honest, if we're going to use any compound in a bodybuilding context, they're all shortcuts essentially. We're using steroids to build muscle. We're using GLP-1s to lose fat. And there's right ways to use them in a bodybuilding context and wrong ways. And I think there's just a lot of varying opinions on that as well too. Because, if you're someone that's trying to push a lot of meals, maybe you don't want to be using a GLP-1 because you want your appetite in place, right? A lot of people are worried about getting the gut distension from GLP-1s as well, just having their gastric system get really backed up. We've had that happen with a couple patients, and then what we'll do is we'll lower that dose, then change it to 2 injections a week. So basically, you're not getting such a bolus amount at once, and those digestive issues have gone away without really having to pull out the medication or add anything in to correct that. So.
Okay. For our listeners, can you tell us a little bit more about what GLP-1 peptides are to begin with?
Yeah. So GLP-1 peptides are glucagon-like peptides. What they do is they help suppress appetite. So the main ones you're hearing about right now are, Ozempic and Mounjaro. So like semaglutide and tirzepatide. Those are the main ones that you're hearing about. You're getting some more refined ones that are kind of coming to the market right now. I think another one was called retroglutide. The idea with the getting more refined ones is just they're less side effects, but they all essentially do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it tends to be like the knee-jerk reaction when Ozempic was becoming popular. It's kind of the knee-jerk reaction to be like us as coaches sometimes to be like, screw that, right? But it kind of like will start to like, hey, maybe there's a place for this.
Yeah.
Especially if if you're somebody that understands pharmacology to some extent, like I humbly say that I do. It's like I always say that there's no right or wrong. There's only context and perspective. So I try to look into like what are the mechanisms of action? What is there a place for this? Like explore that thought process instead of that knee-jerk reaction of like, no, there's no place for that.
Yeah.
Because I always see it's the people that are having that knee-jerk reaction that end up using it the most, which is
yeah.
good.
Yeah, I've tried semaglutide before. I used it for a little bit because I wanted to kind of get some hands-on experience with it. That way I can kind of talk to its effects a little bit more. What I noticed with it is, especially when you're dieting, anyways, it's the food that's in your diet doesn't always taste good, especially once you're getting towards like a really low body fat standpoint. You're like you're craving some good tasting food at a certain point. What I noticed with the GLP-1s is, yes, they do help suppress appetite. But honestly, I feel like it makes it worse for the foods that are already really boring foods. So I feel like it makes you crave those better tasting foods more, and it just makes it harder to eat those foods that don't taste good, that are maybe more bland and boring. That was what I noticed with it. It definitely suppresses appetite though, so I'm not wanting to eat as much. But I definitely got to a certain point where it's like, okay, I just don't want to eat clean foods much at all.
100%. I'm curious with your own personal experience with it, because I used to bodybuild a lot myself, and when I was in long off-season phases where I was forcing food down, I would start to gain like really bad negative associations with certain types of food. Like if I had to force a meal down, and it was like whatever the specific thing was, or the sauce, or whatever it was, and I ended up being like any level of nauseous because I just forced it down. I wouldn't be able to do that. Like as soon as I would smell it, I would just kind of get a little bit nauseous.
Just couldn't touch it.
It's like any negative association kind of because you kind of said that to some extent, but have you noticed any like long-term negative association with certain foods from utilizing that?
I haven't. No, I haven't at all. I came off using it and then was able to put some weight back on again because I was trying to diet down for a trip that I was going on, so I just wanted to be lean. I was going overseas, wanted to be lean for the beach, that type of deal. But yeah, I haven't noticed any long-term effects from I'm not just like totally disgusted by certain clean foods or anything like that. So I know some people have mentioned it, they have that issue, but I haven't run into that at all.
Gotcha. Interesting. That was more for my own anecdote, to be honest. Now, one thing we haven't touched on is thyroid stuff. So there's a lot of misconceptions around thyroid replacement therapy and kind of what that entails, as well as how dangerous it can be. Like, not saying that it is dangerous, but a lot of people think it's more dangerous than it is, for example, and that it takes more to recover from it than it really does, as well as misconceptions in terms of how you dose or what you're dosing with, and how you're T3, T4, like we have options here. So
which one you want to use, or you get the combo as well.
Yeah. So what are some things you do within the HRT practice, or some strategies you use with thyroid medication specifically?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people, especially in the bodybuilding community, they'll order TSH, T3, T4, and reverse T3. And I think a lot of bodybuilders put too much weight on reverse T3 specifically for thyroid dysfunction. I don't think reverse T3 is a great tool for assessing thyroid function. Yeah, you can assess stress a little bit because I know there's that enzyme that's activated when you get stressed, converts T3 to reverse T3. I understand that aspect. But I think the main thing you need to be gauging thyroid replacement therapy off of is TSH function. You need to be looking at TSH function. Are we hyper? Are we hypo? The idea is we want to, because if you're hypo, you're not hypo. Yeah, if your TSH is elevated, your thyroid's working too hard to produce adequate T3 and T4. So yeah, your T3 and T4 might be normal. And I think a lot of people in the bodybuilding space would be like, oh yeah, these are normal markers. My TSH is elevated, but my T3 and T4 are normal. It's like, well, they're only normal because your thyroid's having to work extra hard. So I think in that situation, you can look at, fixing stress to try to bring those things to a normal spot. And if that doesn't work, look at some sort of thyroid replacement therapy. And the goal is you want to have normalized T3 and T4, but get TSH back to a reference, like a normal reference range spot. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that thyroid replacement therapy is dangerous. I know there's a lot of misconceptions about that. And there's physical exams you can have done to kind of assess that as well. But we haven't really run into any issues with thyroid replacement being dangerous whatsoever, especially if the doses we're using too. You're not having somebody take crazy high doses. And I know you see that in bodybuilding sometimes where people just lean into T3 too much, and they're just going to become catabolic anyway. And, not going to be able to have any muscle fullness and good tissue. So yeah, that's a whole rabbit hole you could go into.
Yeah, 100%. TSH is absolutely paramount to be tracking, because that just goes to show too how important it is for us to be getting so many different values from blood work, because we could be missing a piece that's just glaring, that's telling us something, but everything else is looking fine, right? Yeah. So it doesn't always trickle down into the basic stuff that you would look at. And that goes for like when you go to a general practitioner, you're just getting a CBC and a CMP. Those values may be okay, but maybe some of the things that are associated with those values are completely off. And those are only like in an appropriate range because everything else is like a dumpster fire and it's doing everything it can to, keep things aligned to some extent, right?
Yeah.
And thyroid's a good example of that for sure. And obviously you mentioned stress too. We know that stress is like the key component to most of these down regulations that we experience, if not the most key component. And a lot of people will say like long-term dieting, they'll say cardio, it was this, it was that. But what they're not understanding is all those things are adding to the stress load. It's like all these little pieces that you're trying to attach the blame to are stress. It's all stress, And so that's what we see within bodybuilding, especially with thyroid and sex hormones, is that down regulation over time. Now, I often say that it's arguably more healthy to go these kinds of routes within bodybuilding than to not as a natural athlete. Obviously, it depends on the individual and how resilient their body is to stress over prolonged periods of time, and how much down regulation they experience throughout that process. But would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, you can definitely see, somebody who's a natural bodybuilder, they're dieting down for a show, trying to get really lean. You can see all their hormones just basically crash. I would rather have replacement therapy in place. That way they can continue to feel normal. And then, if we want, you can fix things coming out of that. But even then, it's like, you diet down really lean, really work really hard, and then you have a hard time holding tissue. And then when you try to get things back, it's like, sure, your hormones are going to bounce back, but okay, at what rate are we putting, fat? Are we getting fat tissue back on instead of holding muscle tissue because our hormones are in a bad spot, right? So yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think sometimes going the enhanced route in a prep situation makes more sense than going a natural route and not using things. And it's, a lot of people in that community, they'll try to do anything like as scientifically related as possible from a natural perspective, but take the hormones that your body already makes.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked about, I mentioned with thyroid how the recoverability after using thyroid medication, for example, is not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. People bounce back pretty quickly after using some level of thyroid medication. Now, with sex hormones, for example, that's usually what people tend to be a little bit scared of, right? Like coming off of testosterone and bringing things back into a natural range and getting natural production back into place. So are there any tactics that you guys are utilizing to restore that, especially within males?
Yeah, so I mean, you can look at both sides of that, really. If somebody's wanting to come off, you're going to obviously need to stimulate LH, FSH. suppress estrogen receptors to kind of get that negative feedback loop kicking, so they can produce their have normal testosterone production again. I think with regards to thyroid replacement for men, they tend to be a little bit more resilient to high dosages of thyroid hormone than women are. But women aren't needing to use quite as much either in a prep setting either. I think women have a much easier time coming off of androgens than men do, just because they don't require as much anyway. The dosages you're using are a lot less anyway too. You really don't need to be using a lot of androgens for women, I think, in a prep setting. You can really lean into, if you have a good test dose in place, you can use like some Winstrol at the end of a prep if you really want to. But I think leaning into GH and insulin, you can really promote some growth. And with what the divisions are wanting anyway, we're not wanting women that have huge androgen defined delts, right? They want defined lower bodies, and you're not going to, when you start taking more androgens, those other areas get overloaded. It doesn't fit what the divisions are looking for anyway. I really think you can get away with less less of a dose for women. But back to the guy side of things, you can restore fertility parameters without necessarily needing to come off of TRT. Not a lot of places are doing this, but so we have HCG obviously, but you can get compounded FSH too. So you can use HCG, FSH, low dose tests, and then get a semen analysis done, and then throttle your HCG and FSH dose to really see, okay, what area do I need to bring up to have normal parameters for fertility.
That's awesome. I actually haven't heard of anybody doing that, so that's good.
It's a different route for sure. It's not a lot of people really know about it or do it, but it's better than coming off of testosterone, completely crashing, suppressing all your estrogen, feeling the dumps when you don't have to. You might feel a little off just because your estrogen's probably be a little bit high from how much HCG you're going to be using, but definitely a lot better than being fully crashed, right?
100%. So we talked about TSH. We talked about some other general panels that we would pull. What are some other key markers that we're looking at on blood work? Obviously, you and I know the answer to this, but for our listeners, what are some of the key markers that we're looking for, and how we interpret them on our blood work? Let's just say just a random bodybuilder comes in. Let's say he's just natural and he's maybe wanting to explore HRT or whatever, and he just comes in. He's been natural his whole life. You're pulling blood work. What are some things that we're looking at?
So if he's someone who's wanting to get on TRT, I want to assess okay, well, do they need it for a replacement? Are we saying is the scenario, do we need it for replacement or do we need it just for enhancement?
Let's just say he has no idea what he's doing and he's just wanting to get some blood work pulled, and he's like, what are the results? What are we looking at here?
Gotcha. Okay. So I would probably look at, your testosterone, your estrogen, LH and FSH function. Kind of, if he has if he's hypogonadal, I want to assess if it's primary or secondary, if it's, somewhere between where it's, it's adult onset hypogonadism. Want to look at that. SHBG is a good one to look at as well. Because that covers a lot of different areas besides just free hormones with testosterone. PSA is a good one to look at. I think a lot of people, when they're starting TRT, a lot of clinics overlook prolactin. Prolactin is one you really need to look at too. If it's really elevated, it's usually indicating some sort of pituitary adenoma. And for having a pituitary adenoma, your testosterone levels are typically going to be suppressed. So I would say those are the main ones we look at. And then lipid panel, CNP, CBC, those are all really important ones. You want to assess cardiovascular risk. So there's a lot of risk calculators online. I don't know if you've looked at any of these, but you can plug in your lipid panel parameters, your CBC parameters and your blood pressure, and kind of determine your 10-year, your 30-year risk for some sort of cardiovascular event. I think that's important to look at. It's something we look at with all of our patients as well. From a bodybuilding perspective, I think CRP is a good one to look at. You can also look at segmentation rate, cystatin C, A1C is a really important one to look at, especially people that are going to big pushing phases where they're pushing that pre-diabetic territory a little bit, and their A1C is 5.6, 5.7. I think I'd say that's most of the important ones to look at. They got about covered. Ferritin's a good one. Iron. So if someone's donating blood because their RBC and hematocrit hemoglobin are elevated, most likely their iron and ferritin isn't going to be in a great spot. So assessing if they need to have an iron supplement in place. So I'd say that about covers all of them. You could look at APOA, APOB, LDLP, HDLP. There's a number of them you could look at. The list is pretty long.
Yeah, that's why it's so good to get such thorough blood work done, right? So
Yeah.
it's great what you're doing and providing this for people and providing an affordable resource for it. It's crucial, and it's really helping a lot of people steer themselves in the right direction as far as health goes, and it's bringing a lot more awareness to health in general within the bodybuilding realm because that obviously can easily get tossed out the window when it comes to the sport. And it's important for people to actually see the reality of what's happening inside their body so that they can be realistic with themselves in terms of the risks that they're taking, making the proper analysis in terms of what they're doing, how big their goals are, what they're willing to do to get there and stuff, right? So
Yeah.
it's really important stuff. What are some another thing we talked about too is I wanted to mention, I don't know if you mentioned cortisol too. What primarily when do you, because I like to have my athletes get their blood work done in a fasted state, relatively hydrated without any caffeine in the system, for us to get like an accurate cortisol measure. What are the parameters that you usually put into place when somebody's getting blood work done, and what do you think is like and the most accurate time of day maybe to get blood work done, and how that may reflect values on blood work?
Yeah, so I was actually talking to one of my friends about this recently. It's an interesting topic. So we know testosterone is supposed to be at its highest in the morning. So we typically have people test fasted in the morning for testosterone, right? And it's interesting because someone could have a clinically a 400, it's not considered low and insurance won't cover it. But let's say later in the day when because their highest, let's say their highest is 400, throughout the rest of the day they could be 300. So that kind of throws into, okay, when should we really be testing? But you still need to be fasted because hormones can be impacted by you not fasting. Cortisol, I know a lot of people really like to look at that on blood work, and I think it's a good gauge, and you can kind of identify trends with cortisol if you have local blood panels you're able to look at with people. But it's not, I don't think it's the best way to necessarily assess cortisol. Cortisol and DHEA specifically, I think, are things that you should really look at over a 24-hour pattern. Whether that be through Dutch or saliva testing. Saliva testing is typically a little bit more affordable for people. That's a better way to assess those because you can kind of see, okay, where are their fluctuations, where are their peaks and troughs throughout the day. I think that's a really good area for people to look at. But I know a lot of people like to look at in blood work because you can establish trends. So, yeah, we've been able to pull out like adrenal fatigue through blood work too with cortisol. I mean, I've seen cortisol sky high. I've seen it, completely bottomed out in blood work too. It's like, okay, in that scenario, you probably don't need to order a Dutch, or you probably don't need to do a saliva test. You can tell something's off, and you can identify what stage they're in just from that.
Yeah, 100%. So I'll either see it. Usually, if it's just in a decent spot, it's like, okay, maybe we don't need to explore this deeper and like pull a Dutch test and stuff. Because usually blood work's kind of like first line of defense is like the standard. Like, I just need to get blood work pulled. Let's see what's going on. If we have more issues, we're gonna pull a Dutch test, GI map, whatever it is, right? Case dependent. But having that gauge on cortisol, because if it's completely tanked, like that tells you enough,
Yeah, there's no point spending more money on testing if you already know and you can tell from that.
Exactly. Or if we see sex hormones downregulated, thyroid downregulated, and then you see cortisol crank the hell up, it's like, okay, I mean,
yeah, no brainer.
Manage stress better, So
yeah,
it's kind of, the more you like over the years, I'm sure you're the same. Like the more you look at blood work, the more simple it just becomes. It's like, nine times out of 10 is just stress, man. I'm like, we just got to check.
A lot of times it is, but I also think with the area that we're in too, we have a more limited scope on blood work too, because we're seeing the same blood markers over and over again. There's thousands of blood markers you can look at too for different fields of medicine where things get impacted. So we have a pretty limited scope, I think. But you look at, I've seen thousands of blood results at this point come through, and sometimes I'll just go through and look at them just for fun, just to kind of see, okay, what do things look like, and try to pick trends and whatnot. But it's interesting to look at, and once you see enough, you can definitely pick things out very quickly.
100%. And realistically, with bodybuilders, stress is always going to be there. Like it's stressful. Off-season phase is stressful on the body. Contest preps are stressful on the body. They're dealing with life stressors. There's sleep patterns are disrupted. Whatever the variable is, right? It's hard to. It's going to be pretty much impossible to completely eliminate it. So that's where a practice like yourself kind of comes into play, and you're able to kind of patch things up and help people get to the bottom where they can patch those things up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, my opinions on certain things with blood markers have definitely changed too. Just the more I've looked at things, I don't know if you've experienced that as well, where you're like maybe something you placed a lot of emphasis on before, you place less emphasis on now. Would you say you've seen that at all?
100%. There's like things I'm like, I don't even bat an eye on certain things
Yeah,
now. You know, just
yeah.
like that's
For me, one which is kind of, I'm sure this is controversial, is free testosterone. I think a lot of people place a lot of emphasis on free testosterone. You really don't need to.
Yeah,
With
that's
the
what
standard test that's ordered, the standard test that ordered is not really accurate for free testosterone. It's it's an estimation. Even with there's two different LCMS tests for testosterone as well. The initial one, testosterone free total LCMS, uses the same calculation for free testosterone as the standard testosterone test does. The only one that's actually like a true, really accurate measurement is that it's the ultrafiltration. That will actually provide you with a really good reading on free T. But other than that, like the other ones it's kind of a waste a little bit in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like testosterone total just tells you enough, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's not much more you need to know than that. So that's one I haven't really like had much focus on at all, unless things are just really a dumpster fire, you know?
Yeah, it's one of those ones that's cool to have. And, if something's off, okay, we can look at SHBG.
Exactly. Yeah, man, it's very interesting. And the more we look at these things, the more our perspective kind of shifts and we have these paradigm shifts, and the more we just understand what we're looking at. Like now when I pull up blood work, I'm just like, I look at it and I just kind of already know what's going on for the most part.
Yeah.
I can just it's almost like a spidey sense, you know? I'm like, I know where it's coming from, you know?
You know what things to look at right away. Your TSH is like your first thing pops up when you look at blood work, you're like, okay, yeah, this is good, off, what to scroll through and whatnot.
Yep. And whenever I send over a review, I'm like, I just piece it all together. I'm like, this is how like all these different panels, the different things that are off, this is how they all connect.
Yeah.
It's all probably stemming from the same source, and that's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, I know a lot of people worry about hematocrit rising too, and that is something to be worried about, but it also needs to be looked at. Like RBC, hematocrit, hemoglobin all need to be looked at as well in the context of blood pressure. I think you need to be looking at blood pressure. These numbers can be elevated for a short period of time, and it's okay as long as blood pressure, I think, is in a good spot. But you also need to be considering, these numbers are good to be elevated in a training context too. We want better oxygen delivery for muscles too. We're going to have better training outcomes if we have that. So I think a lot of people get like really worried on those, and it's something you need to be considering. It's like, how long are these elevated for?
So hematocrit's a good one to touch on because you've mentioned it a couple times now, and like you said, it's like a higher red blood cell count is going to elicit like a higher level of cardiovascular performance. Like you look at athletes in cardiovascular based sports that have potentially used PEDs, a lot of times they're using things that increase red blood cell count.
Yeah,
right? You look at somebody like Lance Armstrong or whoever it is, right? And so there's a level of benefit to it to some extent. It's definitely like something that people are, I would say, a little bit overly cautious about. Now, one thing I want to ask you is, because usually the knee-jerk reaction is to go dump blood, right? You go give a pint of blood, and that's the move. And then whenever you go get blood work done again, it's elevated again, and you dump blood again. What is your viewpoint on that? Because I have found over the years that there's almost a rebound effect sometimes when you give a pint of blood. The body almost like has a rebound effect where you're right. You're almost at a higher point than you were when you got that blood work pulled. So.
Yeah, so like when you go dump blood, your body's being put to a state where it needs to create more because you just dumped a bunch, right? So you could put yourself in a situation where you're chronically having to dump blood. There's a couple of things you really need to look for, with managing, your blood work. It's okay to have somewhat bad hematocrit. You have to keep an eye on it. When the more you're dumping hematocrit and red blood cells and donating blood, your iron, like we were talking about, is going to become depleted. We need iron. You need to have that in place. So I think you need to make sure, so you're donating blood, but making sure you're keeping that in a good spot at the end of the day. There's a lot of factors that go into cardiovascular risk management. Viscosity of the blood, your arterial walls, how well those are functioning. Are your veins really constricted? Or are they not? That's where something like, telmisartan can come into place too, or losartan. I think losartan is a little bit better than telmisartan personally. But ARBs can be really good just for kind of preventing that conversion to angiotensin 2. So we're able to have more dilation with our blood vessels, and we're able to have better blood flow. Because at the end of the day, the big one you got to be keeping an eye on is blood pressure. That's like your true telltale, because blood pressure is bad for a long period of time. Your kidneys are going to go bad. It's going to affect a ton of different areas.
100%. There's a reason they call it the silent killer, right?
Yeah.
So with red blood cell count, for example, there's other things we can do to kind of bring that back into a decent range without just going and dumping a ton of blood, right? There's supplementation we can use. I work with Leviathan Nutrition. They have one called Hemoflow that's very good.
I use it. It's good.
I've seen it work on labs. Like it's incredibly good. You mentioned ARBs too. Usually like Hemoflow in tandem with an ARB is like, that's like kind of been my bread and butter with athletes to keep blood pressure in check and to keep red blood cell in check. I very rarely tell an athlete to go dump blood. I'm usually able to get those things in check just with those two pieces. ARBs kind of had a big surgence over the past not even the past couple of years. I would say like the past year, really. ARBs, specifically telmisartan, because it's just like, I don't know why that name stuck so hard with everybody. But can you explain a little bit more like what an ARB is to some extent, and kind of the other one that you mentioned too, kind of what differentiates that from telmisartan?
Yeah, so ARB is an angioretensive beta blocker. I'm pretty sure I have that acronym correct. But when you have increases in renin and then converting that to angiotensin 2, it causes your blood vessels to constrict. And when you're having blood vessels constrict, you get increased blood pressure. So by inhibiting that process, you're not having your blood vessels constrict as much, from my understanding, is how those work. Losartan just seems to be a more powerful one. We've seen better outcomes with people using losartan versus telmisartan. A lot of doctors, when they go towards prescribing heart medications, ARBs isn't really their first route they want to go either. It depends on the issue why you have elevated blood pressure too. It could be something where it's cholesterol related too, and then you look at something like statin therapy, which I know a lot of people have they got different opinions on statin therapy as well. I would say losartan tends to be a little bit of a better one. They've both been around a long time. It's just, it functions a little bit better in my opinion.
Awesome. Yeah, they with bodybuilders specifically with elevated androgens, like ARBs are, because if a bodybuilder, for example, like they're in good shape, they're not obese, they're not having other issues, like the blood pressure is coming from androgen abuse. And so the ARB is going to be the route to take when it comes to this blood pressure stuff. Just because of how androgens agitate the angiotensin system. So
what are your thoughts on statins in a bodybuilding context? Because I know typically with the androgens, you see some dyslipidemia going on. You have people that have elevated LDL and poor HDL.
So there can be a place for it. I try to address like the root cause of where that cholesterol is coming from, and try to address that potentially without medication on the forefront. And then also just a lot of times that can be diet related too, because sometimes it's just from pushing off season really hard for a long period of time. So sometimes it's like just a matter of going through a cleanup or a health phase. I usually like to, if it gets to that point, because I feel pretty comfortable with ARBs, for example, and I think that they're pretty benign for the most part. It's just like toss it in. There's a large reward and very low risk, right? When it comes to these other things, I tend to try to refer somebody out to more like a cardiovascular expert or a cardiologist, somebody that can dig a little bit deeper into it, potentially somebody that understands bodybuilding too. That's always beneficial. We have some in Houston. We have cardiologists here that work not specifically with bodybuilders, but they have a good understanding of bodybuilding. And so being able to send people to those, that's something I like to refer people out for.
Yeah. The one I've seen typically in a bodybuilding context is rosuvastatin. I've seen that one be used quite commonly. That tends to be one that's pretty tolerable for most people. They're able to still get good function and correct those cholesterol markers. I wish it was something we had access to. It's just not something we can get through the compounding pharmacies, unfortunately. All the ARBs, ACE inhibitors, we're able to get those though. So that's something we've definitely utilized. but yeah, Hemoflow by Leviathan. Yeah, I've been using that. I saw my hematocrit drop by like 2 points using that. So that just being on top of hydration is obviously huge. So
100%. A lot of these things, it's I always say just low hanging fruit stuff. Like you can just address the little root causes, and things seem to patch themselves up pretty easily. People seem to have a knee jerk reaction and take drastic measures when it comes to some of this stuff. When, like I said, like with cholesterol, for example, a lot of times, like all it takes is just pulling somebody off of a calorie surplus for like 4 to 6 weeks, and they're good, or bringing their doses down of whatever the androgens they're taking, and we seem to be in a better place. So sometimes it's just like an accumulation effect.
Yeah.
You just need a little bit of a reset rather than an actual medication,
Yeah, I think also another thing is fish oil or krill oil is probably like something that should be a staple. It's like if you're using androgens, like you need to be using that.
100%.
A lot of people just overlook that. Along like tier T, I don't even manage all these other things. It's like, no, there's a lot of other things you need to stay on top of if you're using androgens.
100%. If anything, there's more you need to stay on top of, and more things you need to have in place. I'll plug Leviathan and nutrition again too. Their omega-3 supplement is fantastic. Have a very specific delivery system with it, and it's fantastic. And they're always upgrading their formulas too. So I really I always tell people, like, whenever I send over like a Synergistic link, for example, or I send a link to a Leviathan product, I don't really care about making money from this. These are brands that I just actually trust and that I want you guys to go through. It's affordable. It's going to be the best bang for your buck. And so I really try to stand by companies that have a lot of integrity, like yourself. So
thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, Leviathan's got great supplements. I've used a couple of their things, and yeah, they've got awesome products. Yeah, they just updated their Hemoflow as well.
Yep. So tell me, what's some of the plans for the future? You've expanded a lot over the years. I've kind of watched your growth. It's been very impressive. I always love to see entrepreneurs succeed over time and just see how things grow and play out for them. You started with the blood work. You're doing HRT now, and you're delving into more modalities within those things too, in terms of different types of testing, different medications, all that kind of stuff. So is there anything on the horizon in terms of growth and expansion for you guys?
Yeah. So, I mean, like right now, I think I mentioned to you, I'm in nursing school right now. So I want to do that and kind of really learn more about the cardiovascular system. So, I mean, I'm still pretty early into my program, but I kind of want to go into something cardiovascular related with nursing, and then try to get a nurse practitioner license afterwards so I can operate from a provider role in my clinic. I know that's like what I want to do long term. So I think that's one thing that'll be a big change. There are also lots of other markets that need blood work testing from an affordable standpoint that aren't really getting it. So I definitely want to expand to some of those areas as well. I think that's just that'll probably be another area of growth. That might be a separate business entirely. Not sure yet. But yeah, I would say those probably the main areas. And then just getting to more states for TRT and HRT and be able to help more people and serve more people. That's the biggest thing. But I've always pushed blood work being the most important factor in the business. And there's a lot of people that try to make their money off medications, but I think you can get to a lot of root issues with blood work. You can still be a profitable business operating from that forefront. And you're putting patient safety and health at the forefront when you do that, rather than just pushing meds because it's easy to push meds. So
100%. We have blood work, we have Dutch testing, we have GI maps. Is there any testing that you see coming out of the woodworks, or anything that like new coming out by any chance?
That's tough. I mean, I feel like once I hear about it, it's already been out a bit. But right now, GI, Dutch, and blood work's like the primary things you're hearing about. I mean, there's tons of different testing modalities. Just depends on what industry you're in. I think within the bodybuilding community, though, these will probably be the big ones for a long time. I think you'll see some people move more towards like salivary testing for stress hormones and whatnot, just as people continue to learn more. Just because those tests are more affordable than Dutch. Dutch tests can get pretty pricey, so you can get pretty good reading. I would say just as good of a reading on salivary hormones, and the cost is a lot better than Dutch tests.
100%. What are some trends that you see happening within the HRT realm specifically, and where that industry is kind of heading? Because I feel like it's still relatively new, and there's a lot of things to play out within that industry too.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are more open about steroid use now than they were before. So I think that's one trend we're going to continue to see. I think there's going to be a bigger push for emphasis, like bigger emphasis on, longevity and health. Because, we're seeing TRT not just be bodybuilding, but you're seeing it be more gen pop as well. But, especially in the bodybuilding community, we've seen tons of people die in the past couple of years. So I think there's going to be a lot more education around, making sure people are doing things that are safe and really weighing, doing a cost benefit. I don't know with whether bodybuilding is worth it to them. They were willing to pay that price from a health perspective. There was another one. I'm forgetting what it was, but I'd say those are probably the main areas you're going to continue to see growth in. That and GLP-1s. I think you're just going to continue to see new drugs on the market as well. Hopefully, telemedicine becomes less regulated. I know there's all the issues with the DEA and being able to get medications prescribed via telemedicine, and there's some new rulings we're waiting on for November 2021 because we're still kind of in like a limbo with the DEA and being able to prescribe controlled substances via telemedicine. So I think we're going to continue to see more allowances for controlled medications to be prescribed through telemedicine. And you might see TRT, like testosterone, become descheduled. That'd be really awesome if we did. I think the community that's going to be primarily behind that is going to be the trans community, which is just interesting. I really think that'll be the community that pushes for it. It shouldn't be something that's a controlled substance anyway. I wouldn't say it's something that's addictive. It doesn't deserve to be classed in that area. And we got female hormones that aren't controlled substances. You get progesterone, estrogen; those aren't controlled. It doesn't make sense to make testosterone controlled. So hopefully we see that get descheduled, but that could be a long time for that to happen. I'm not quite sure. I think the main thing is just seeing more allowances from the DEA. I think there's going to be a continued pushback for telemedicine to be able to continue for controlled substances, especially like Adderall is a controlled substance. That tons of people take Adderall, and for people not to be able to get that through telemedicine would be crazy. So I think there's just going to be some changes.
This is probably going to be kind of controversial, but do you think that like big pharma not having their hand in it may be part of the cause of that?
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? I want to make sure I answer you correctly.
Like with telemedicine specifically, the fact that it's kind of new and there's a lot of like younger entrepreneurs getting into this space, the fact that there isn't bigger players like getting involved quite yet, or maybe not as involved as some of you guys are, maybe that they're placing more regulations on that kind of stuff, or maybe making it a little bit more difficult for you guys, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think you see that. We've already seen that with some medications. I think a lot of the peptides that are getting pulled are things that you're going to see, some big companies come out like Pfizer, Lilly with their own versions of it. And it's going to be something you can't get through compounding pharmacies. You're only going to be able to get the commercial. Eventually, generics will come back out, though. I think it's just one of those things. They're trademarking a drug, so that way they could be. When you trademark a drug, you're the only ones able to sell. It's like once you trademark it, you have 7 years to be able to sell that drug, and after those 7 years are up, anyone can make a generic form of it. So they can make. Let's say they trademark it now, but they don't get to market for 3 more years. They would have 4 more years to be able to sell it for. So I think we're going to see some of that go on with some of the peptides for sure before some of them get brought back to compounding pharmacies.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. That was definitely what I was trying to get at there. So
yeah, that Ozempic. I think Ozempic. We're going to see a lot of we're going to see some of glutide. I think we'll see some of glutide get pulled from compounding pharmacies as well. There's already been. It's a whole mess. You'll see semaglutide's commonly compounded with B12 as well, and that's just to get around the fact that you're not supposed to be able to compound just straight semaglutide. It's just like using loopholes so compounding pharmacies can still operate that way. I think we're going to see that get pulled from compounding pharmacies next. Probably be that and tirzepatide.
Yeah, that's some interesting information there. Outside of the specific medications, HRT, lab work, what's some advice that you may have for some aspiring entrepreneurs or small business owners? Considering that you got into a good space, right place, right time kind of thing, stars kind of aligned, and you've been able to grow to the extent that you have, and you have bigger things on the horizon. What's some advice that you might have for a young entrepreneur?
Keep things simple. I think simplifying your processes as much as possible will really help you in the long run, and then don't expand into other areas until you feel like you've really mastered one area. Because there's a lot you can expand on one product or one service, to a lot of different areas and really you can really grow from that perspective without necessarily offering a ton of other services. Because when you throw in other things, there could be more moving parts. I mean, a perfect example of that would be, I mean, even for me, I can relate to that. So the lab work is a very, like, I was just doing lab work sales. That's a very simple process. It's not a ton of interaction with people. There's not me trying to coordinate schedules with a provider. Things are very easy from that perspective. But when you throw in other services that might be more complex, you need to make sure your systems are really good. So I would say my advice would be to keep things as simple as possible and try to expand on one particular route for as long as you can prior to entering into other areas.
Love that. Love that. Man, it's been awesome chatting with you. We've been emailing back and forth for years, so it's good to actually have just a conversation about this kind of stuff outside of this being a podcast. So I already kind of asked you like what your plans are for expansion and kind of what's on the horizon. Is there anything else potentially that Synergistic might be releasing soon that people should be on the lookout for?
Not at the moment. I mean, I've dabbled with the idea of doing a supplement line for a little bit. But I really want to grow the HRT aspect first a little bit more. But supplement line is definitely something that I'm interested in doing down the line. It's just I need to get more time on my hands so I can actually focus on that as well and give it the full attention it deserves. But yeah, I want to do a supplement line towards kind of like what a lot of these other companies are doing. Things that can manage blood pressure, things for gut health, some different areas I could explore that would be really tailored towards this niche already of bodybuilding.
Awesome, man. Like you said, you gotta like handle like kind of master one thing before you move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I've got like 3 or 4 different connecting ideas of things that I could do that could really accelerate growth. But it's like I want to be really proficient and good at one thing. I don't want to have my hand in too many things and not be able to do the things I started efficiently, right? So
yeah, that's a good business model too, is like, having everything kind of in-house for the most part, where you have the blood work and then the resources that people need based on the blood work results within the business, right? You have the medications, you have the supplements. It's definitely a good business model. So, man, it's been good talking to you. What are some good ways for people to get in touch with Synergistic? I mean, I already sent all my athletes to you guys. I have the link in my bio for it. So if anybody listening is looking for the website, just do that. But what are some other ways that people can reach you? What's the Instagram, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the Instagram is just Synergistic Labs, pretty easy to find. And then for our website, synergisticlabs.net. So pretty easy to find that. If you just Google Synergistic Labs, will be the first thing that comes up as well. And then the email address you can contact us at would be info@synergisticlabs.net. If you're wanting to become a new patient with us, we got some new patient forms on our website that are pretty easy to find just from that homepage. So you can just click that homepage and fill out the new patient form, and you'll get some emails that are automated sent to you if you want to get enrolled with us and start getting treatment. So
awesome. Well, beautiful, man. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean.
Thank you for joining us. Your journey towards excellence does not end here. We're here to help guide you every step of the way. For more insights and to become a part of our community, follow and subscribe. Your feedback illuminates our path. Be sure to share your thoughts and stay tuned for more episodes.